Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to this 1 hour extended edition of News in Focus. My name is Fahraaz Patel. We say Jazakallah to you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. If you told me on January the 1st, 2024, that the ANC would have lost its majority, you may have believed it to a certain extent, given their performances during the local government elections starting in 2016. If you told me that the ANC would be sitting just below 41%, you may have said that is, quite frankly, impossible. If you said that the MK party would be the official opposition in the National Assembly, you may want to fall off a cliff. If you said that there would have been a government of national unity, you may even want to jump off that cliff. And if you said Floyd Shivambu would be leaving the EFF, and you jumped off that very same cliff, you wouldn't want to go ahead and even find something to hold on to. That is how one would go ahead and sum up South African politics for 2024. It's been a year of elections through many countries, but here in South Africa, it was an election that many would not have expected some results to be going the way it did. Joining me now to look at the year that was in South African politics, I'd like to welcome two powerhouses within the political analyst sphere. I have Sandile Swana, who is, of course, no stranger to Hilaal TV. And, of course, joining us after a very long time, I'd like to welcome Tessa, who is, of course, the Director of Programs at the Rivonia Circle. Tessa, I want to start off with you. I'm sure you wouldn't want to fall off the cliff when you look at the ANC's performance. You know, I followed you on social media, and it's something that it didn't catch you by surprise. I mean, the fact that they were sitting below 41% really just shows how poorly they performed this year.
No, definitely. In 2022, when the Rivonia Circle did a survey taking the political temperature of the country, we found two things to be true at the time. One was that if we had about 60% turnout, and we ended up having 58% turnout or so, that the ANC would definitely go below 50%. We were at that point talking about 47, 46%. But secondly, that if a new political party was introduced into the fray, what people were calling a political alternative in the focus groups we ran, that it could get up to 14% because people were so fed up with the status quo. And so both of those things have become quite true. And I think the ANC getting to 40%, even before the MK party was a reality, was something that was already, quite clear in the minds of many people watching, mainly because I think there was so much discontent and a feeling that the ANC just was not going to be able to hold ground, and that the political options that were on the table were going to fragment. We were going to see more political options, and we did see this high rise in new political formations, grassroots political organizations, and we just saw people riling against big established parties. And so the ANC and parties like the EFF took those blows. The ANC, of course, the biggest one, because the electorate were looking for what they called a change election, and that's what we saw.
Sandile, we've spoken a number of times about the fact that the ANC seems to continually lose touch with its voter base. My word, weren't they punished at those elections?
Yes, it's interesting to me that after the Polokwane conference, at every election, we saw that the ANC was losing votes, a share of the votes in South Africa. And then 2016, they lost metros. Now, what that says is that, and they have admitted this themselves, number one, they cannot meet the needs of the people because the quality of the average cadre or the average member or deployee of the ANC has deteriorated significantly over time. They don't have the quality of people to deliver the services. Number two, those people, once they are deployed, they are distracted not only by factional battles, but by the rush to loot in terms of tenders and other things. more time is devoted to such activities rather than the actual on-time, high-quality delivery of the service.
Tessa, there's a saying, the jig always comes up. The jig was up for the ANC. Sandile puts it quite firmly right there when he speaks about, you've got these members, right, that are implicated within the Zondo Commission. You've got 10 entrepreneurs, which has become part and parcel of the African National Congress, and they believed, look, there was absolutely no way this was going to catch up to us. You go to the areas where service delivery, and of course, Tessa, you know, as Rivonia Circle, you've visited areas that see the service delivery deteriorating day by day. The voter was going to get frustrated. And the polls showed that, didn't it? That the moment you go ahead and neglect communities, they are going to go to the polls and they're going to truly show you who they are.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw three effects of that. One is the fast decline in voter participation. And we've just seen millions and millions of people are opting out. So we had 27 million people who registered to vote out of about 41 million people who were eligible. So already that gap is large. But then when you look at the actual turnout of about 16 million people, we can see it's even larger, where people are just disillusioned. And one of the things that we found in the work that we did is that people are no longer just disillusioned with the ANC. There's a growing disillusionment with democracy itself. And that's also why you're seeing that, you know, the rush to find alternatives is still amongst a small base of people, because ultimately people are asking, if democracy doesn't deliver development, what is the point? And particularly in a country where the ANC has lauded themselves for having a constitution that is one of the most progressive in the world, that has embedded in it socioeconomic rights. If you cannot realize those rights, then people start saying that the constitution is not what it's cracked up to be. So you have the ability for political parties to start increasingly say, maybe we need to change the constitution. And we saw parties like the PA, parties like the MKP, actually canvassing against the constitution in the way that they were getting votes. So you can imagine how many of those people who were coming to the polls because of those kinds of messages might have stayed away. So I think we saw that in one regard. But there are two other small things that the ANC, and I don't call them small in any regard, but they're kind of twins. One is the question about delivery to communities, and we've spoken a lot about that. But the second is its absence in organizing in communities. And while the ANC has got this wide branch network on the ground, it is not as present in communities as the ANC once was. And so that feeling of being detached from politics, voting for a party that you don't know, for leaders that you don't know. We heard time and time again, we want to vote for people we know, and we do not know these leaders. The ANC is at the front line of a party that has been detached more and more from the so-called ground and from the communities, and communities just feeling like politics is about some sort of palatial elite sport that has left everybody else behind, and people are just saying, enough is enough. We need people who we actually know and who we can ultimately hold accountable for the poor service delivery.
Sandile, something interesting Tessa brings up, the fact that they lost connection with the communities that they were in. Because during elections, it's all good and well to go to the areas of Hammanskraal or Khayelitsha or Soweto or any of the other areas which have been hit hard by a lack of service delivery. And they come there with their VIP cars, and it just seems already then the disconnect is there. 2016 local government elections, 2021 local government elections. Was it a case, Sandile, of the ANC being arrogant or blatantly ignorant of just how much ground that they have lost with the actual community member that voted for them out of loyalty from 1994?
I think the quality of leadership is in question, because the statistics that show that the ANC is losing support in elections were public. They are public. You can get them now from the IEC website. But even now, as we speak, I still get confronted and find myself in heavy-heated debates as to whether it is true that the ANC started losing votes shortly after the Polokwane conference and lost them consistently. It's a problem where they even deny that the GDP actually collapsed after the Polokwane conference, and so on and so forth. And let me just add something else on this issue of being connected. You must remember that in the pre-1994 period, the ground forces, as they have come to be called now, if you wanted to go and actually have a march or stuff like that, a protest, the people you would get, certainly around Joburg, you would have to go to Alexander Township, Soweto, Westbury, and all these places. We went there. We were known as activists. Now, for instance, people like Paul Mashatile, Opet Papela, we knew that to get into Alex, those were the guys who were known in Alex. They were well established. But you can quickly discover that they are now staying in palatial mansions far from Alex, and they don't even know what is going on in Alex itself. So there has been a physical detachment, an emotional detachment, and then obviously that developmental detachment, disconnection, let alone the guys who've come back from exile. Some of them have never even bothered to re-establish proper connection in the townships. So that there is a disconnection as we speak today.
Tessa, I want to get this question to you. We just got about 45 seconds. Action SA, because we just move away from the ANC, Action SA invested quite heavily within their election campaign, but they've come out, of course, with just under 10 seats within the National Assembly. I mean, if there was a disappointing story by the ANC, I think the Action SA would be one of that, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And I think one of the untold stories of this election is that the MK ate everybody's lunch. And when we were analyzing the MK and the rise of the MK, we did not think about the ways in which the MK was actually going to find different community organizers and different community formations. And because many, like Action SA, like many new parties, have established themselves on the back of existing parties. And so you're taking people from one party to another party. Those people are not going to be as loyal to you as you might think, and are easily captured and taken away by the next new party that comes. And the stark difference between Action SA and the Patriotic Alliance makes this point, because the PA, for the most part, grew a lot of its own membership from people who were not politically connected or politically active before, and that helped them withstand a new entrant coming in and being able to snatch their lunch. And that is a lesson to the new parties coming in. Build your own bases.
Yeah, of course, we're going to be touching on the MK party in a bit. After the break, we're just getting started. The Government of National Unity. Of course, when it was announced in June, hope, question marks, that was all brought in. How has it fared so far? We'll be back after this break. Welcome back. Now, in 1994, when the first Government of National Unity was created, it was created out of an essence of goodwill and nation building to try and bring a sense of good aspects that the country needed at the time after so many years of colonialism and apartheid. Of course, forward wind to 2024, another Government of National Unity was formed as the ANC had lost its majority, and as Tessa said, parties like the MK and so many others started eating into the voter share. Sandile, I remember asking you when we were at the ROC and we saw the numbers started coming in. And we had this discussion, I know it was very brief, about the Democratic Alliance potentially getting involved in some sort of coalition government from a national level. And you mentioned the name Helen Zille. She's really, even until now, really being quite a vocal aspect with regards to the GNU. How much of an influence has she wielded, even though it's been from far, in this GNU, and how the DA has wanted to influence its assertion within this GNU?
Helen Zille is probably one of the top three most influential politicians in South Africa today. Let alone that I would qualify that statement by saying, perhaps arrogantly, that she was fortunate to rise at a time when the left was deteriorating, so that people she's contending with and competing with are below her standard. At an earlier date, she might not have survived. Now, so she is that, and then she has a very strong backing from BLSA. You'll remember that on the 28th of May, 2024, the BLSA Business Leadership South Africa, with probably about 150 or so, between 130 and 150 of the larger CEOs of the largest companies in RSA, actually saying that a coalition between the DA and the ANC must be formed, and that coalition must exclude MK and the EFF. Now, that has been done. So I say that she can say what she likes, because in essence, the African National Congress, and I will say it's the African National Congress of Cyril Ramaphosa, is welded to this so-called GNU with golden cufflinks of the BLSA, the smell of money in the air, and physical support to implement things, such as the recovery of Eskom, Transnet, and so on and so forth. So the ANC of Ramaphosa, which has no capacity, gets capacity from Helen Zille and the PLSA just to survive on a day-to-day basis. That would be my reading of the situation. And that gives a power.
Tessa, there's of course two disagreements between, and it's mainly between the ANC and the DA. I want to touch on the first one. Sandile is mentioning BLSA, and of course, business has had a huge opposition towards the National Health Insurance Bill. Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi is quite adamant that this is going to go through. And there's, of course, these negotiations that are happening between business and government on how this needs to be implemented. From your point of view, how do you see this ending? Because government is standing firm on NHI. You've got the DA saying this can't work. And then you've got the outside factor, which is business saying, don't go ahead with NHI.
Yeah, the question for the DA and for business, for that matter, when it comes to things like the NHI, and I'm assuming the other one that you're talking about is the Bella Bill,
yes, of course,
is what is the consequence that they would mete out against the ANC if the ANC went ahead? Because right now, it seems that the DA is hamstrung and has hamstrung itself in this arrangement with the ANC. Number one, it doesn't have in its hands very much power, even though it's in the Department of Education when it comes to the Bella Bill. Doesn't seem to have much authority to change anything, because the ANC has set it up so that they have not only so much power in their own hands as ANC, but also have this kind of cushioning in terms of the 9 other parties or 8 other parties that are in the GNU. And so, the best that Helen Zille can do and the DA can do is say, well, we're going to walk away and let the whole thing crash down. But that doesn't really help the DA much. The DA loses the crucial powers that they do have access to right now. And they're going to have to weigh out, is the Bella Bill and the portions of it that they're unhappy with, or the NHI, worth losing the kind of political leverage that they can have and the kind of levers of government they have in their hands right now in the 6 ministries that they do have some kind of control over. Especially because really it's only going to be next year when you're going to see the powers in those ministers' hands and in the DA's hands actually being able to be effective with new budgets and so forth. And so you must ask, the DA must ask itself, whether it's willing to lose as much as it will if it walked away. Yes, you can give the threat that, the economy will fall apart, but we've seen economies crash and rebound. We've seen the rand crash and rebound. And it's not in business's interest either. So they would be encouraging staying in the coalition for as long as possible and finding a way forward. And I think the ANC is going to win the majority of those battles. I think it's a very empty threat from the side of the DA, because I think they've come in on a weaker foot than they thought they would have. And they really don't have many consequences that won't hit them hard. If they go back to the electorate saying, we only had 1 year in power and have nothing to show for it, they are worse off.
I want to bring the Bella Bill perspective to the Sandile, and Tessa mentions it quite well. I mean, I think the DA is starting to finally understand what the meaning of the president's prerogative is. Siviwe Gwarube, who is of course the basic education minister, is slowly starting to understand this. Of course, a few weeks ago when that Bella Act was signed at the Union buildings, she was not present for it. She then says, we'll look at the clauses, and of course there was the signing with Solidarity, which the ANC of course voiced its displeasure with. The Siviwe Gwarube one's quite interesting, isn't it, Sandile? Because you're now seeing a minister, quote unquote, to a certain extent, really defying what the president's prerogative is. I mean, that in itself already seems to be a bit of a disconnect between the ANC and the DA within this coalition.
Yes, I agree with the commentators that are saying that the DA now is becoming unconstitutional in its, because you cannot go and make an agreement to overrule the Constitution. You shouldn't do that. So when you elect somebody to be the president, and unfortunately the president is not elected by the DA, it's elected by Parliament, including people who are not in the GNU. It's the president of the people, because it's an indirect representation. Those MPs are voting on behalf of you and me. So, and the DA wants to hijack that and say it can be a private deal between the ANC and the DA, and that is incorrect. Secondly, the Bella Act now, before it was implemented, it's important that part of the impetus for its implementation, there were court decisions about the rights of these children, and language rights, cultural rights, etc., that needed to be respected. And that bill does this. And people had plenty of time and many occasions to submit all kinds of suggestions as to what must be done. And those opportunities still remain when the regulations are being formulated, as Songezo has said. So I think the position of the DA on the Bella Bill, on the Bella Act, is far-fetched, but Cyril Ramaphosa has been very polite in accommodating the right wing, the racist right wing, on these matters.
Tessa, I want to bring in ministers who are actually enjoying their jobs. One of them is Gayton McKenzie. I mean, he's the Minister of Sports and Recreation. He seems to be thriving on there. I mean, you've got Ghanief Hendricks, who's of course taken the Deputy Social Development from Al Jamaa. You've seen, other, you've got Mzwaleni Nyonsho, who's now the Land Reform Minister. So there are supposed ministers who are kind of saying, hey, you know what? We're going to relish this position because this is an opportunity for us to test what we can do within the executive.
Yes, and I think that I've heard this from so many members of the PA repeating what Gayton has said, that contrary to the DA's approach, which is this idea that they can tell the president what to do, Gayton has taken the approach that says, I now work for the president, and has told his party that they're going to toe the line. I mean, he says that quite loudly and then still goes to the Bella Bill protest. So I think that that's going to fluctuate as we go along. But I think the point here is that they want to use these positions to, number one, profile themselves and get as many public wins as they possibly can, and also start to understand the inner workings of those corridors of power they would not have been a part of before. And I think using this as an opportunity to do that is important for smaller parties. I also think that as much as I detest the idea of a coalition of parties around the table, what the GNU also has done by having smaller parties and smaller role players in this large tent that it's created, it does mean that it gives more flexibility and more room and more places for people to find each other and work together and to negotiate places of commonality. And I think that that's interesting for our politics. It's going to be interesting to see what this means for the ways in which political parties interact, engage, and find each other going forward. And also it means, and just going back a little bit to the DA, it means that even if the DA walked away and business was so unhappy that they didn't want MK or EFF in the room, the numbers tell us that any number of small parties, and we've seen Bosa getting the Appropriations Committee, for example, they're not in the GNU, they could go and bolster it up without having to bring in other parties. Same for Action SA. There's a cozying up between parties to kind of find each other, and hopefully this will strengthen the hand of parties that will start to find where there's synergies between them and start to collaborate more going into the future and future elections particularly.
After the break, the MK party, who would have thought they would have been the official opposition in the National Assembly? Yes, that is the case. How have they been able to achieve this? They are truly one of the underdog stories of the elections which occurred this year. We'll be discussing that after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. The MK party, yes, they are one, if not the underdog story that occurred this year in the elections. 14.59%. If you look at that number, and if you look at just how they achieved it, it really boggles the mind how they could achieve this with former President Jacob Zuma taking the presidency of the party and really eating into so much of the other bigger political parties. Sandile, I think prior to the elections, we've had discussions about the MK party, and I don't think both you and I really expected such a major impact. But when you looked at the Jumbotron, when you looked at the numbers that they were taking, you just could see that this was a party that were not merely there to make up the aesthetics of the elections, but they were there to eat into some of these bigger parties, especially that of the ANC.
Thank you. I think that obviously going into these elections, I was not focusing on the surveys, but on the pre-existing data, especially IEC data. If you went into the IEC data back to 2009, you can see there that when Jacob Zuma ascended the presidency of the ANC, for the first time, the ANC won KZN. It was more than 1 million votes that Zuma brought immediately to the ANC, although every other province declined, including losing the Western Cape. So when they discharged Zuma from his office, about 500,000 votes were lost. So what that told me was that there is a following that is attached to Zuma himself personally. When they had lost the eThekwini, it was Zuma who intervened. When the ANC had lost the eThekwini, it was Zuma who intervened and provided them support to hold on to power. In conclusion, then, let me say this. My estimates were as follows. The ANC was at 57, and they had been a trend of decline. So let's say they would have ended up at 53. But before that, they had gotten 45. And if MK was to get 11%, actually the ANC was going to get in the lower 40s. That was, and that is what happened. But the issue is also in the methods of how they mobilized the support that they eventually got. That was unique and still remains.
Tessa, I want to touch on that uniqueness that Sandile mentions. And it's quite interesting because they established themselves just a year ago. Right, you're thinking, okay, what can they honestly achieve within a matter of 5 months? But in that 5 months, with names that, of course, we have not seen now since they've recruited them to the National Assembly, they were able to achieve it. And the charisma that Jacob Zuma has within the following, especially that of KwaZulu-Natal, was evident to see, wasn't it? It's a classic saying of, don't kick the fat lady until she sings. This happened right here. It was not over until that fat lady sang. And the proof was in the pudding when you looked at those results.
No, absolutely. But I think that to say that this is a party that's a year old is to fudge history a little bit, because Jacob Zuma's ability to build up a constituency started within the ANC. And that constituency, loosely called RET, was not just an ANC constituency. It was building a narrative in society outside of the ANC as well. And then you have the 2021 July riots. And remember earlier I said that the ANC had lost touch with communities. That for me was one of the big signals of the fact that we lacked political leadership in communities. When you had a galvanizing around a political figure and around a political moment that could cascade into the kind of riots that we saw for 10 days and the kind of protest action that we saw that exploded. And that was, a lot of that was the machinery of the Jacob Zuma support base as well. And so you've seen this kind of slow incremental growth of this force that Jacob Zuma has built up around himself. And so I think it's more than his charisma. It is an organizing power that MK has. But the other thing that we have lost sight of in the last year is how many people Jacob Zuma and the MK party have gone to go and collect in form of community-based organizers, community-based organizations. We've seen Sanko now in KZN just wholesale say that they're going with the MK party. But for me, that was solidified at The Rock. You all will remember when we saw 26 small parties standing behind Jacob Zuma. And there was a realization that we had that there was already relationship building that has been happening. It can't just be the Jacob Zuma effect by itself. There was a lot of organizing and bringing together of different groupings. And I think going forward, what we think of as Zulu nationalism is going to become an ethno-nationalism that's quite plural. The Western Cape MK support came from Khoi and San communities in the main, and from traditional leaders and in different provinces. So I think there's an organizing machinery, whether it's been sophisticated or unsophisticated, that has happened, that has not just been about taking ANC branches and repurposing them, or taking EFF branches that are repurposing them. There's been a going to society and a whispering campaign almost that has consolidated around the MKP. And if you lose sight of that, you underestimate what could still be coming with the MKP.
Tessa mentioned something interesting there, Sandile, the RET. And of course, Jacob Zuma went ahead and brought back members who were loyal to this RET ideology. He went and he got the Lucky Montanas, the Brian Mulefes. He even picked up Mzwanele Mani. And of course, he went, and then I remember going to a MK press conference when Floyd Shivambu was, of course, unveiled. And I saw Mr. Moyani was, of course, the former SARS commissioner. He brought the band back, as they would say, Sandile. And that just proved, didn't it, that those who were very close to him, those who held these key SOE positions during the Zuma tenure, have now joined the MK party. It was meant to be, wasn't it, that those who are loyal to him would obviously join him in this political project?
Yeah, crudely, I have said before that actually the ANC needs to be divided. You see, at the moment, there are people who are denying that there was ever a state capture. And if you ask me, the economic damage that has been done in South Africa is attributable to the Polokwane Brigade. And by the way, Cyril was part of that Polokwane Brigade. Cyril and Ramaphosa, Cyril and Zuma did this damage themselves. Now that gang has conflicted among themselves and split into two. Cyril has taken his portion, Zuma has taken his portion. And I will just only say this, that yes, they are well organized, they can mobilize and they can take power, that they've demonstrated. The only problem is that they already had power before, and we saw the devastation they can bring to the country. And that gives me sleepless nights, really gives me sleepless nights. And for that reason, I do not support this idea of the so-called joining together of only black parties, that sort of thing. I prefer that seats must be allocated according to the proportion of votes that you already have. There must be a mix in that government. If we give Zuma and company full power in South Africa, we're back to destruction I dread the destruction that Zuma wants to bring to South Africa.
Tessa, before we go to the break, Jacob Zuma is not getting any younger. There's, of course, this big question mark about succession within the MK party. One may look at Floyd Shivambu as being probably someone who could succeed. He, of course, occupies the SG position of the party. Now, the MK party seems to be built around Jacob Zuma. His party represents, you listen to his daughter, to Zuma, say that, my father really is the brain and mastermind behind the MK project, this MK party project. Can the MK, in your view, Tessa, survive beyond Jacob Zuma?
Well, I've got controversial views about that. One of them is that while Jacob Zuma has definitely made himself central to the MKP project, and even done so in the way the constitution is set up, many people don't realize that the president of the MKP has a lot of sweeping powers afforded by the MKP constitution. So he's definitely a central figure. But I think that the MKP is a political opportunity. And people are seeing it as a political opportunity and are willing to go in there and fight for it. And political contestation and the chance for political contestation can be a highly motivating factor to keep something going. If you think about the ANC, one of the things that's kept the ANC alive, even through its decline, has been its ability to contest internally and have internal democracy. And while the MKP has said that it isn't going to go to conference soon, I mean, soon it could really be until the next local government election, which is around the corner. And then they may go to, if they go 10 years without an elective conference, that would be a different thing. But I do think that there's this opportunity for contestation, and there's a lot of incentive to keep the MKP alive. There's a lot of money invested there. So let's forget about what resources may be coming from external sources. Just by getting almost 60 seats in parliament, it has already got access to a lot of resources that are worth fighting for, positions that are worth fighting for, etc. And as those positions grow, so will the incentive. But the idea of Jacob Zuma not making it to 2029, if Jacob Zuma were to find an untimely death in months or weeks before an election, I think we might see that its support increases, not decreases. I think here about the IFP's Do It for Shenge campaign and how much, the kind of contestation of legacy can actually be the thing that is gifted to the MKP to take forward with it. I think we're really overestimating that. But like Lukona Mguni, my colleague, says, we talk about what if, Jacob Zuma doesn't make it to 2029. There are no indications that he won't at this point. So the question really is, what if he does?
Well, you've just summed up the quote that I'm going to mention as we go into the break. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. He may just be dying that hero and, as Tessa say, increasing the votes for the MK party. After the break, one party that really suffered quite a lot during this elections, the EFF, they're going into their elective conference this weekend. What is the future with regards to that? The conversation wraps up after this break. Welcome back. Now, the EFF goes this weekend into its elective conference, or as you would term it, the National People's Assembly, but it does so without some key members. One of them, it's former National Chairperson Advocate Dali Mpofu. It's former Member of Parliament Mzwanele Manyi. Another former Member of Parliament Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane. But the one that will probably hurt the EFF even more is that its Deputy Leader Floyd Shivambu had departed them this year. They finished fourth, Sandile, in the National Voters Roll. Big blow for them. Where's the EFF now within the political sphere of the country, Sandile?
I think the first thing to do is to accept that all the political parties that participated in the 2024 election lost votes. I think that has been made in this program. Secondly, a big important point was made in this program that anybody who starts or tries to grow a political party must not use the remnants of another political party. There could have been a mistake made by the EFF to think that they are the dumping ground of rejected ANC members and things like that. This election has taught them that lesson, that they need to know their core market and focus on it. The position that they are at is although it has declined slightly, it's not a bad position. Now, there's a new phenomenon. Dalimpofu and Floyd Shivambu, I want to believe that these are the people who took the view that other smaller political parties, in their view, including the EFF, must be dissolved and liquidated and join the MK party. Now, you cannot have a leader of your own party who believes that you must be dissolved and who's perhaps been working actively in that direction. So now that those types of people have left the party, including Floyd Shivambu, to me, it represents another 10 years of rebuilding of the EFF into a competitive political force of the left in South Africa.
Tessa, the departure of Shivambu, of course, put a lot of question marks with regards to the longevity of this progressive caucus, of course, that was established to counter the GNU of the executive. Tessa, where do we see the progressive caucus now in terms of how it stands within itself, given that Julius Malema himself said that it's there, we'll accept it, but of course they won't play ball with the MK party on a number of issues. And then of course you've still got other parties within this progressive caucus like the National Coloured Congress and the ATM in terms of where their role is going to be. And especially on one aspect that they are kind of united on, and that is of course bringing back the motion of no confidence with regards to the Phala Phala investigation.
I think the Progressive Caucus has very quickly come to bite the EFF a little bit. You would realize that it was actually Floyd Shivambu who championed the creation of the Progressive Caucus when he was still in the EFF. And it's worked out really well for him, but I don't think it's worked out well for the EFF in two ways. One is that it has named and labeled the MK a friend of the left, even though there's a lot of discussion and a lot of dissent around whether the MK party is actually a genuine left party, given some of its conservative views, particularly its values and some of its cultural views. And so the EFF has kind of created a competitor in the MKP by calling it part of the Progressive Caucus and inviting it in. But now it faces a different kind of challenge. And that is, how do you work together within a Progressive Caucus, not only in Parliament, but outside of Parliament, if you do want to create some sort of united front against the GNU and still have a competition for constituents going into elections. And I think it's going to be that tension, whether it's going to be able to hold that tension, that's going to be telling. And I think the EFF has already signaled that it is not willing to hold that tension, that it is more interested in making sure that it protects the fact that the EFF can survive what it sees as an onslaught from the MK party. It doesn't see the MK party as an ally. It sees it as a competitor coming for it quite vigorously and viciously. And Julius Malema has been very clear that they are going to protect themselves, their base, their constituency, and their positioning as the vanguard of the left politics in South Africa against the MKP. And so it may not see the Progressive Caucus surviving very long under those conditions.
Sandile, there's one question for both you and Tessa to wrap up what has been a very solid conversation. We look at our democracy, we look at our constitution, and I think all three of us can agree that, even though there were discrepancies with regards to the votes, you've seen many parties really, saying that there could have been potential rigging or whatever the case may be. We saw the constitution and our democracy really coming on top. As a South African, and I'm going to start off with you, Sandile, I think just from that, how much of a test was this for democracy and the constitution, and how much of a pass would you give it in terms of how it had operated in a year of elections where we just saw our neighbors, Mozambique, really go into a sense of chaos immediately after their elections.
Yes. So it's not that we lost all our institutions. I think that's where your question goes. IEC, because the Constitution is a piece of paper, but if it's elections, the IEC becomes the physical manifestation, if you like, of that Constitution. So the IEC as an institution has maintained credibility on the African continent in 2024 and across the world. It has maintained that. And regardless of the court challenges, I think the IEC will still come out all right, and our electoral laws will still come out fine as they stand. Not to say that there's not enough room for improvement there, but as they stand, we are still fine. So that institution, unlike other institutions that have been compromised, including the state-owned enterprises, the South African Police, NPA, and others, the IEC still remains relatively and substantially respectable.
Tessa?
I think that Sandile is completely correct in terms of what our institutions have fared. But if we measure the health of our democracy only on the strength of our institutions, I think that's how we're going to lose people along the way. Because what South Africans are saying in mass is that democracy has to deliver for the people. And that the institutions are not seen as delivering for the people at all instances, and more so delivering power to elites, power to people with already relatively high levels of power in a country of high inequality. A survey that was done a few years ago by Afrobarometer showed that 72% of South Africans said that they would give up the right to vote if they could have better development outcomes. That stat keeps me awake at night, because we can continue to have perfect constitutions, perfect instruments, perfect institutions. But if we do not deliver to the people of South Africa, it will all be for naught, because people will start riling against even the best institutions in favor of their own needs and their own development and their own survival, because many people are in survival mode in South Africa.
Tessa, Sandile, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us here on this News in Focus special edition. Much appreciated. We hope to hear your voices definitely next year as we continue to assess the political sphere here in South Africa. Thank you so much. That's Sandile Swana, political analyst, and Tessa Dorms was, of course, the director of programs at the Rivonia Circle. Yes, it's been a huge year for South African politics, just the changes that have occurred. But Tessa puts it straight. There has to be a democracy that works for the people. 30 years into it, we've taken many strides, many steps, but there's also been a lot of steps backwards. Service delivery. We're currently sitting in a crisis where many communities do not even know if they're going to be getting water. Water, a basic right for each and every South African. That is something that should keep everyone awake at night. The fact that there are certain deliverables that are not being executed for the people of South Africa. Those in power, and I think it's a message that they need to hear, not only from myself, but from everyone, that if you're not going to deliver for the people, come the local government elections in just under 1.5 years' time, you're going to see the fruits of what you have done in the polls. And the chickens will definitely come home to roost. Deliver for the people. They put you in power. They've given you the responsibility. If you're not going to deliver on it, then don't come and complain when the election results don't go the way you, as a political party, would like it to be. That's all we have for you here on this edition of News in Focus. From myself, Fahraaz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Stay beautiful, South Africa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.